I'd say this man needs no introduction, this Mr. Jim Pease. But he's one of the
But you're
best.
gonna do it anyway.
I'm going to do the very short version.
Okay.
I met him on a trip to Alaska by accident. And I mean, like I was on it and he was on it and Cindy and everybody. And he probably kept me from getting eaten by a bear because he said, don't turn your back to this. All of you look when you're doing hunting berries and whatever. And then he called me and said, do you want to go to the Amazon? And that's the end of that story. Because I went, so did Ginger, so did Bob. So
Thank you, Chris. Well, my job, I think this afternoon with this presentation is to show you a little bit of the Raccoon and talking about some of the good times that we have on it. We all are certainly very concerned with the water quality and the future of our state. If the last legislature didn't make you concerned about the future of the state, you haven't been paying attention. This is a very disturbing time, but I think there are bits and pieces that make us be optimistic. The book that Tom and I and a whole 20 other people helped write, that Connie Mutel put out, is intended to be an optimistic look at the future of Iowa. It says this is what can be done. And I've had a great privilege of being able to paddle a lot of Iowa's rivers over the last 10, 12 years now. Excuse me. And as a result, I have both optimism and pessimism, depending on the day, as to what the future of those rivers look like. So we're going to talk a little bit about paddling the North Raccoon, a surprising river. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I think it's surprising. As you can see from this map, Iowa is a state that is rich in rivers. Lots and lots of rivers cover our landscape. If you look at the sort of the eastern 2/3 of the state, these rivers all drain off that Des Moines lobe and south of it to the Mississippi. About the western third drain to the Missouri or Missouri tributaries. And I've had the great privilege to paddle over 2,200 miles of these rivers in the last, I guess it's been 14 years now, for the Iowa Water Trails program. And they've literally been from coast to coast, up and down. I paddled northwestern Iowa, the Little Sioux and the Big Sioux, southwestern Iowa, the West Nishnabotna Ditch, the West Ditch, I call it, in north central Iowa. One of the most surprising rivers, and what our rivers could be, is the Winnebago, up in north central Iowa. And because it is lined with riverine wetlands and restored oxbows, as somebody mentioned earlier, there is so much wildlife along it. Landowners and agencies all got together and did the right thing for that river up north of Forest City. It's an amazing river. The Turkey in the upper Iowa, northeastern Iowa, the Wapsie, the Quoketa, the Cedar, the Iowa. And I grew up down in southeastern Iowa, right on just north of the Skunk. And as a child, I had this great opportunity. We had parents that trusted us, either that or they were really hoping to get rid of us. But my brothers and I explored the Skunk, the Des Moines, the Iowa, the Cedar, and the Mississippi by canoe. We bought our first canoe. It was a used Old Town wooden canvas canoe from the Iowa Outdoor Program. I still have it, by the way, and it's not in good shape now. But we bought that from the Iowa Outdoor Program and began to explore. And our parents gave us the trust and the understanding to know that we'd come back. And they knew we were good swimmers and that we wore our life jackets and all those sorts of things. So we didn't tell them until I was think I was in my 30s when I finally talked to them about riding the waves behind the barges in our canoe. And my mother, of course, was horrified, and my father went, So we had great fun exploring those rivers. And I think that childhood experience is why I have done what I've done as an adult, being in the outdoors. Those were formative experiences, but that trust and understanding were just absolutely critical. My wife says that we had a feral child, and if that's feral, then I'm all for it. I think it's great. So we are a state that is rich in rivers, and the Raccoon is one of those incredible rivers in the state. This is me as a young child. I had a beard at a very young age, paddling the rivers of southeastern Iowa. And I think it gave me a sort of a unique perspective on Iowa rivers, because I have this long paddling history. I've paddled in lots of other places, not as many perhaps as Robin Fortnier has back there. You can ask her about that. But lots and lots of places. And growing up in Burlington along the Mississippi and having the experiences in all those rivers that are coming down to southeastern Iowa, I think was just so formative and influenced my whole perspective on Iowa, and certainly on its rivers. When I was a senior in high school, I worked at a sewage treatment plant. And you'd say, what does that have to do with rivers? It has a lot to do with rivers. Because in those years, this was a secondary sewage treatment plant. It was fairly new on the scene in the 1960s. And because I knew the chemistry, that's why they hired me for the summer to do all the chemical testing of the effluents that came out of that. And working at a sewage treatment plant, you learn lots of other things about people's lifestyles. We won't talk about those, it's right after lunch. But at any rate, it was a really formative experience. It taught me, for example, before that, we would always swim in the Mississippi. After working there, I never swam south of the sewage outfall, the effluent outfall. I found that was not a wise thing to do, because in those years, even though the sanitary sewers went through that plant, in those years, the sanitary sewer and the storm sewers were the same system. And in most parts of old cities along the river today, that's still true. Some parts of the newer parts of the cities, those are separate systems. But whenever we would have a 1-inch rain event in the city of Burlington, we would close the plant and everything went directly into the river for a couple of days until, and that still happens in many places in the state. Should talk. This is why working in a sewage treatment plant gives you all sorts of great information. It's really pretty amazing. So anyway, it was a formative experience. Since then, I've helped design and implement, along with Robin, the Master River Sewers program for Iowa Rivers Revival. And so basically, I'm a river rat, not a sewer rat, but a river rat. As I said, I've had the great privilege, I think, to work for the Water Trails program for the last 14 years and paddled over 2,200 miles of our rivers. And I don't just paddle them, I do long reports on them. On my life jacket, I have a little digital recorder. I take my camera, my GPS unit, water and all kinds of other things, and record what I see as I go, and then write long reports. It takes me as long, or if not longer, to write the report for the Water Trails program than it did to actually paddle those sections. So 2,200 miles is a lot of river, and includes, you can see, this is from coast to coast, north and south in the state, and these are the majority of the rivers that I have paddled. I think the only place that I'm lacking rivers, and I'm trying to get them to let me paddle it, is in south central Iowa. The Grand River, I think, would be a grand river to paddle. So working on that. So in Missouri. What's that? In Missouri, yeah, exactly. So It's given me a really incredible perspective on these rivers. So one of the results of this comes out are these brochures that are available in paper form, and I forgot to get them out. I've got a couple with me, and include 3 different ones on the North Raccoon, as well as one on the South and Middle Raccoon River. There are, I think, 14 here. I think they're up to 20. Now you can go to this website on the Iowa DNR page and go to things to do, canoeing, kayaking, water trail maps and brochures, and you can download versions of these. The downloadable versions of them actually have more information than we're able to put in the paper copies, okay? Especially access to access information, you know, what this section is like for you to make. So encourage you to go ahead and get those, because they're very, very useful. They say there are now 20, and whenever you put things out, of course, in paper, the next month they're out of date. You know, something changes on the river, new access gets completed, or one gets washed out. You know, and so they're never perfect. They never will be, but they're amazing opportunities, I think, for people to be able to paddle Iowa rivers. Here's the insert from one, for example, and it shows not only the accesses up here. This is the North Raccoon and Sac County. This is the Vogel access right up near the border of Sac and Buena Vista. That's really hard for me to say. I speak Spanish, so it should be Buena Vista, right? So it's, and Iowa is pronounced Buena Vista. That and Madrid and Nevada too. It goes through Sac City, and so the accesses are indicated. But the really good thing is, I think, that the maps are accurate with all of the roads that cross them, and so they tell you how to get there. In most counties, I wouldn't say all of them, but in most counties, there are also the water trails. When a water trail gets designated, they are given signs to be put up by their county roads department that indicate, there's an access coming up so many miles ahead. Many of them are run by county conservation boards. And in some counties, the relationship between the county roads department and the county conservation department are very, there's a great distance between them. So sometimes the roads department won't put them up for them, but in most cases, they're pretty good about it. And getting them on state highways is even tougher, by the way. But there almost always is signage, and this will tell you how to get there if you can't, if you don't have access to those road signs. So this is the section from the Vogel access down through Sac City, down to the Whitehorse access, and then the next section down goes from Whitehorse down to Ritchie access down here. And we're going to concentrate. It also tells you by the color on the river, whether it's blue or this color, or there's a third color, whether it's recommended for beginners or intermediate paddlers, or really should just be paddled by advanced paddlers who know how to do whitewater and other such things. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to start a little farther north. This, of course, the Raccoon, of course, those of you who live in Polk and Dallas County know that it goes clear on down into Polk County. But I really want to concentrate on the northern part of the North Raccoon. So we're going to go farther up into Buena Vista County, up to 640th Street, and put in an access just off of, well, it's not really an access, but it's accessible off this gravel road. And it's one of the ways that we explore the possibilities for expanding water trails or designating water trails. And so what are the kinds of things along it that make it good for paddlers? Well, one of the things in this section that's really exciting is that most of the land along that part of the river is all public. So having public land, it made perfect sense to be able to go a little farther north. If you look at where this is the west side of the river, this is actually a section owned by Buena Vista County Conservation, and where an access, I think, probably will be put when they finish designating this. You can see it's not an access now. These banks are a drop off of 3 to 4 feet. So it makes it a little bit of a challenge, especially when you've got a game leg, but you can do it. Let your canoe or kayak down over the edge and get in. I chose to put in on the east bank because it didn't have a guardrail along it. Climbing over guardrails for me with a kayak in hand is not an easy feat anymore. And so I chose to let myself down the hill on the other side. But we paddled from here down to the Vogel axis and then accesses on down river. So I want to show you a little bit about this. Most accesses are marked by the signage that are formal accesses. It says what access it is, and the numbers on there are labeled from the mouth of the river, which is access 0, where it empties into another river, up to, this is 189 miles north of the mouth of the river. So that is access, that's Vogel access. That's as far as it goes right now, the water trail. It will go to access 194 or 195 in Buena Vista, probably as soon as they finish the acquisition. And most accesses do have some sort of formal access to them. In the case of the Vogel access, this sign right here, as you're coming down river, says this is the access. Well, sometimes they put accesses in places that are not really accessible, and this is one of them. And there's a much better access, a little farther upstream, where it can be, where it can you let yourself in on a beach, and it's right off the parking lot. And it's like, why didn't they put the access here? You know, I don't know, but so that's where most people will put in. You can tell by the trail that's there where the good place to put in. It's also a great place to fish. Other accesses farther downriver depends on the access. Sometimes they're nice and gravel, like this one in the lower right-hand corner, or concrete. Other accesses, like the one in the upper right-hand corner, can be a little challenge in terms of mud and silt along the way, and you have to slip and slide your way through it or wade through the mud. Can't be afraid to get your feet wet. I once observed a young couple, I'm sure this was their honeymoon trip in the Boundary Waters. My wife and I were just coming out to Boundary Waters, and they were going out. She had a very large pink at that point. I thought, it's not going to be pink by the end of this trip. A pink bonnet on, and he was stepping into the canoe from the dock, and of course she was not holding onto the dock, and his legs got wider and wider, and he fell in. And Cindy said, "Why don't you help him?" I said, "No, this is their honeymoon. I'm not getting in the way of this one at all." I'm sure they learned a lot. And she, by the way, she gotten in without getting her feet wet. I thought, this isn't going to last. The canoe trip may last, but I don't think the marriage will. It's certainly a test. Anyway, so some of these accesses can be a test for you as well. It depends on the water level. Some accesses like these, this is a brand new one, actually at Grant Park. They are actually boat ramps, and most of them have places where, as a paddler, you can just off the boat ramp, there's a little sand or a little mud or something that's a little easier to get in and out for canoers and kayakers than it is on the concrete boat ramp. But anyway, there are a variety of accesses available all through this area. There are a number of hazards as you paddle. Those of you who paddled the Raccoon or any other, how many of you paddled on the Raccoon? Good, most of you. All right, so you know you've run into some of these hazards. These are called, these big, large boulders in the water are called glacial erratics. They've been left behind by the outwash of the last glacial event that came to Iowa that covered that Des Moines lobe. If they're shaped certain ways, you call them glacial erratics. Never mind. Rather than erratics, okay. And they're also in this river because a lot of it is actually covered along the ways with woodland along the way. There are often trees in the water, and those can create dangerous sweepers, particularly here. For example, the best place to go through where the water is flowing, if you're reading that water, you want to go right and go here, but it will take you right into the sweeper. You need to know what your skill level is to avoid being caught up in that sweeper, which could actually cost you your life as well as your kayak or canoe. There are hazards along the way that are not on all the maps. John Wink and the Water Trails program has an interactive paddling map available through the website as well, which tries to keep up with hazards along the way. There is no way. Rick, you've helped remove a lot of the hazards on the Skunk River in Story County. Do new ones occur after you clear the old ones?
Yeah,
constant. Yeah, it's a constant problem of actually clearing out some of these hazards. So be aware they're going to be there. You're not necessarily going to be warned about them ahead of time. Be prepared to deal with them. There are also on this section of the Raccoon, there are a whole series of rock dams that have been put in. A couple have replaced actual dams that were there before. Others were put in to improve the fishing and the actual higher oxygen levels in the river. And this particular one is south and east of Sac City. You come around the corner and it's right there. You can hear it if you can hear better than I can ahead of time, but there's not always a lot of warning for them. There aren't signs up that say rapids ahead or anything like that. In this particular one, I paddled this section in 2017, and the water was about 4 feet higher than it is right now. And there was a log jam here. I had to, in order to portage, I had to crawl out over the logs to get up to shore and pull my kayak behind me to portage around this. But so again, you need to know what your skill level is. Are you comfortable reading the water, knowing where the safe place to go through is, and then riding it through? You need to understand what your skill level is. Don't take it for granted, or it will take you. So there are some wonderful at different water levels. These lower water levels, these may be more dangerous than they are at higher water levels. So you need to scout them ahead of time and kind of know what your skill level is. Here's another one that is sometimes runnable, sometimes not. Depends again on your skill level and what your comfort level is. And here I'm running one at Grant Park that when it was at higher water level in 2017, took me and turned me over because it had a big rooster tail. I thought I could ride it out. I didn't. So, but I had fortunately taken my hearing aids out, put my camera in a waterproof bag, all those things that you do ahead of time to make sure that you're prepared. So there are lots of little runs along the way that make this section very exciting and can be great for fishing if you want to take the time to do that. People have asked me, they say, well, you know, tell me where the best fishing holes are in this river and that river. And I said, you know, I can't, because I didn't take time to fish along the way. Had I taken, I'd still be paddling the first couple 100 miles. I wouldn't have finished 2,200 miles at all. So I didn't take time to fish along the way. Much of this river, the amazing thing about the North Raccoon that was very surprising to me is that how much of the land along it is a very wide corridor of habitat, a very wide corridor, and actually in pretty darn good shape. Because of all of the publicity that surrounded the lawsuit with Buena Vista and Sac and Ida counties, I was really concerned. And if you drive across those counties, you see nothing But if you drive it in the winter, you're going, where would a pheasant live here? My gosh, there's not a fence row anymore. It is absolute great corn desert and soybean desert. And there are CAFOs pretty often actually in that area. So I was very apprehensive to paddle this section of river. So to come upon a section that is nicely grassed on both sides, yep, there's some erosion on those banks, but pretty nicely grassed, it's got trees, and I can see some farm fields beyond, but they're a lot farther than they are in many of our rivers. Many of our rivers, as you saw some of those photos earlier today, come right, they're farmed right up to the very edge, and in fact, fall into the river as they go. The raccoon, the North Raccoon is not that way. There's quite a lot of habitat along the way. It's well buffered, unlike many of our streams in the state of Iowa. This is the North Raccoon. It's surrounded by upland woods that actually, if you learn to read the trees along the way, like I have to do as I go, I typify whether they're predominantly oak forest, oak hickory, or they're moving into the maple basswood, and you can tell that often by the color of the leaves as you move along. You can kind of see where the maple basswood is taking over and becoming the future Iowa forest. So they're often covered along the sides by pretty wide swaths of trees. Sometimes it's a combination of reasonably sloped banks that are well grassed. Yep, they're not natives. This is primarily Reed's canary and brome, but in some cases there are native grasses along the way. Occasionally there is some prairie. The prairie is in almost all reconstructed in this particular section of river. And yep, as that river comes around and exerts the power on the outside bend, it will erode that bank somewhat. But really to see this kind of prairie, that wide a swath of buffer along the river is quite unusual for Iowa. There are places also along this particular section where the upland is really covered in savanna. Those oaks are probably, this one up here was a big open grown oak. You can tell by those large lower branches that come out from it, was probably 125 or more years. These are probably somewhat younger, but you can see underneath, instead of being covered like many of our forests are by honeysuckle underneath or buckthorn underneath, it's actually open and probably is grazed in the springtime by cattle. Most of the river along here is all fenced so that cattle cannot get into the stream, unlike many of our rivers. As Neil was talking about earlier, the landowners along most of our rivers, unless they are considered, and this is a legal term, not a geographical term, unless they are a meandered stream, the state, us, the citizens, only own the water that flows over it. And the landowner owns not only the land on the sides, but underneath the river as well. So it technically, if you step out of your canoe or your kayak, you're trespassing in many cases. So that hasn't been litigated, but that would be really, really interesting. Yeah. But so most of our rivers are not fenced. The raccoon in this area is fenced to keep cattle out of the river. This is a very nice thing. It means the banks are not as broken down by cattle as they are in those areas, as you saw in some of those earlier photos today. And because it is grazed, it's still open underneath. It's still very much has a savanna look about it, which is very unusual for most of our savannas in the state. There are places in which you get these huge exposures of loess, as water is a very powerful erosion tool. It has carved off these banks, and these are amazingly stable. They certainly fall some, but amazingly stable over time, and have a woodland above it. And those loess banks quite fascinating for many reasons. Among them, for me as a wildlife guy, is the fact that the birds will make their homes in them. Not only do the kingfishers that Ray was showing earlier carve a hole, they actually dig it themselves. They're digging not just a hole though. Kingfishers dig back 10 to 12 feet into the bank, nest at the end of that tunnel. Okay, these are a colony here, a small colony of bank swallows that also excavate that themselves. Those are not tunnels. They're usually only 6 inches to 12 inches into the bank. When you think about a little swallow doing that, that's pretty amazing. So they take advantage of these exposures of loss to get back in there. There are lots and lots of plants. Tom didn't talk about this, but I think we have as paddlers, and I've talked to groups of paddlers, I think we often have a plant blindness. We paddle along and we notice the wildlife. We don't necessarily notice the plants, but along the North Raccoon and a number of other rivers, there are lots of great native plants to see, from the currant, which is up here in the upper left-hand corner, to elderberry, down to the silver maples. This was taken in mid to late May. The silver maples are already bloomed and are going to seed, ready to drop. And they put out abundances of seeds. And so some of those will form those new bottomland silver maple forests that are so valuable to our bottomlands. And oftentimes the wild fox or sweet William decorate the banks. There's lots of plants to see along the way, if only we take the time to stop and see them. There's lots of wildlife sign along the way. You may or may not see wildlife, depending on how many of you are paddling together and how loud you talk to one another, because very often I see paddlers and they're always going downriver and they're talking to one another, and the wildlife hears them long ahead of time and they never see them. So you have to look for the sign. Whoops, I went through it here. These are beaver that have carved out, and I think this particular one, this is actually the den site. Iowa beavers don't build those lodges that are so popular in the northern lakes. They build into our banks, and the entrances are usually underwater, below the normal water level, and they cover the bank then with sticks from this mulberry or whatever, I think it's the mulberry that has been felled here. They'll cover that bank entrance with sticks. Underneath nearly every bridge, I would say in Iowa, all the old bridges, the old concrete bridges, have cliff swallow nests beneath them. I would say every one. The newer bridges, they make it out of smoother concrete or something, because they don't seem to be able to build on those. They will build, and even on the steel bridges, they're too slippery for them. They can't stick their saliva nests. They can't stick to the steel so much. So they'll build around where the bolts are, and they're able to get enough purchase on that then. And they build these wonderful clay pottery nests. Each nest is built of between 1,100 and 1,200 beaks full of mud. And not just any mud, but just the right mud. They have to find the right mud to make it stick together and hang it up there so that the entrance faces down. And when the fledglings are ready to go, they better be ready to go, because the only way is either in flight or in the water. And you may become a quick meal for a largemouth bass that might be in that stream, or a smallmouth bass. So these are some of my favorites to watch along the way. And you'll see just whole collections of these under nearly every bridge in the state. Also look for nests along the way. Ray was talking about some of these. Certainly the one on the left is actually unusual in that it's an eagle's nest that was in a hackberry tree. Most of our nests in much of the state are in very large old cottonwoods. Northeastern Iowa, you find them in some large old white pines that have those sort of flat tops to them. But This particular one was in a hackberry, which was very unusual. I've found very few of those. I've been able to document with my GPS coordinate where about 80 new nests are, or were new to the DNR at the time, across the state. Yeah, one in the upper right-hand corner is actually a red-tailed nest. As I mentioned earlier that these are often, they're still made out of sticks. Sticks are not as large. And if you zoom in on this, you can see there's actually a tail sticking out up here, and it is a red tail. And this one is a great blue heron rookery, or a heronry, properly named. And this had 6 or 7 nests in it, and I just got the 3 in this photo. And those nests, they're not quite as bad as a mourning dove nests in terms of their construction, but they're almost that bad. You say, how do these birds, these baby birds, stay in that loosely constructed nest? Well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get blown out of them, but they're pretty amazing to come along the river. If you're quiet, and only if you're quiet, these guys, you'll see some of them basking along the river. This is a soft-shelled turtle about the size of a nice big dinner plate, bigger than the ones we had lunch on. And oftentimes, most often, you will never see them. They will scoot into the water the moment they hear or see you. And you see the tracks left behind as they scooted off the mud bars, the sandbar. This one, for some reason, he was really, really sleepy, or he didn't understand that I was danger to him. Sat there for quite some time. And the nice thing about soft shells is they will dump into the water, and then they put their little snorkels up. They'll go in and they put their snorkels up to breathe and look around for where you are as you go by. So you can watch. There are mussels left in the raccoon, not many species, and certainly not the numbers that there once were. These are 2 quite decent size. The upper right-hand corner is a plain pocketbook, and the one on the left, the lower left, is one I was quite pleased to find a live specimen of a pistol grip. And very unusual in Iowa rivers in general. So I was pleased to find it. I found another live one actually in Beaver Creek in Des Moines. I paddled the 150 miles of that whole Icon waterway. My reports were actually the basis for which they formed that waterway, which is going to be, I think, quite a thing for central Iowa eventually. There are lots of insects along the way, damselflies and dragonflies, like this little damselfly bluet, and they'll often light on the deck of your boat as you go along. Sometimes you're lucky enough to find them still in the nest. This is a brancher, a young of the year bald eagle. This guy is getting ready to try. They're called branchers because they get out on the edge of the nest and flap their wings, trying them out there to see if they can catch the breeze. And you're lucky to catch them. You have to be there probably no later, that varies a little bit, but mid to sometimes late May, you'll find them still in the nest. But most often after that, they're already fledged from the nest. But bald eagles, seeing bald eagles, I write about it in my article for the or my chapter for the book Tending Iowa's Land. But as a young youngster growing up on the rivers of southeastern Iowa, we used to sit in the wintertime in one of the outfalls south of town, where the electric company would put in warmer water back into the river. So the ice, was no ice on it. We'd watch bald eagles fish in front of us from a little half-constructed blind in a pile of logs along the river. We watched those quite often as kids. The ones we saw were all adults. This is in the 1950s and 60s. All adults. Why were they all adults? Because this wasn't happening in Iowa and wasn't happening over much of the range. Eagle populations were taking a huge dive due to eggshell softening from DDT and other organochlorines. And is amazing to me. As a young biologist, the first, in 1972, when William Ruckelshaus actually banned DDT, amazing. We had our first nest back in Iowa in 1979 along the Mississippi, and I thought, that's wonderful. Glad to see they're re-nesting again. I thought we might have 4, 5, 6 nests along the Mississippi, maybe a couple along Missouri eventually, if we were lucky. Boy, was I wrong. It's amazing. Never so glad to be wrong. We now have over 400 eagle nests on every interior river in the state of Iowa. That's pretty amazing. So,
Thanks.
yeah. So, well, yeah, thanks to the brand new agency, the EPA, for actually having the courage, the political courage to do that. And that's what it takes. It takes that kind of political courage. Not just the scientific knowledge, but the political courage and the will to do the right thing. And that's what we have to do too. There are lots of deer along the river, and you can tell that because of all the deer stands that you see along the river as well. All kinds of, and I've taken lots of pictures. I think I'm going to put together a photo book of the different kinds of deer stands that people have. So they're just fascinating what they will use. There are often, you get a chance to watch wood duck moms and their babies. Very often they will hide their babies in those, some of those branches that have fallen into the water, these tangles of branches along the shore. They'll hide their babies in there, and mom will come out in the middle of the river and pretend that she can't fly. Oh, look at me. And she'll get you chasing her downriver. And after a couple of turns in the river, she'll say, oh, I think we're far enough. And she'll get up and fly and go back to her babies. So they do the broken wing trip, just like a lot of birds do. This is a wood duck, mama wood duck here. You get to see lots of flycatchers along the way, including this eastern kingbird, actually perched on one of the fences that kept the cattle from getting into the river, as well as you've seen several pictures now today of cedar waxwings. Cedar waxwings are not an official flycatcher, but they catch a lot of flies. They'll sit along the river and they will dart out. They'll wait for something to go by. And they'll dart out and grab an insect out of the air and come back and eat it to that same spot every time. So they're a wonderful catcher of flies, although they're not an official flycatcher along the river. You may also see at this time of year, in May, you'll see lots of warblers, yellow warbler and the redstart here. And if you're very lucky and very quiet, you can watch this little green heron eat. And also, and you didn't have this picture.
I was being tacked.
Oh, you were being tacked. Okay. This is a great after lunch picture. They're feeding on a raccoon, I think, that has either fallen off or drowned or something in the river, and they're making a lunch of it. We could debate, Robin, maybe which organ that is that the one is eating, but maybe we'll move on. Okay. And of course, you're gonna see bald eagles along the way. Again, it was tough decisions by I would say very courageous politicians and administrators who made those tough decisions. We seem to have not a plethora of those available these days. We need some people who are willing to make some very tough decisions. Great blue heron fishing in one of the rock shallows. There are places along the river, certainly, where erosion is still a problem, where banks are falling away. In the lower right-hand picture here, you can see those are actually prairie grasses. Prairie grasses I have not found to be deep-rooted or strong enough to withstand the high levels of water that are now moving down our rivers. They simply cannot hold the soil. Willows do a much better job because they seem to bend and not break, and will hold those banks much more solidly than I've found than prairie grasses will. Prairie grasses certainly help, and we need those for percolation in the buffer strips, but they are not going to hold the bank against the kinds of water loads that are coming down when we get these 4 to 6 inch rain events. Boy, it's tough to hold that bank against much of anything. There are a few places where along the river where in the 1950s and 60s and even into the 70s, landowners were convinced that if they put their old vehicles along them, they would rip-rap that bank and keep it from eroding. And instead, what it did was a way to easily dispose of these vehicles and farm machinery and all kinds of things. There is at least one refrigerator gulch, which I reported to the proper authorities to see if we couldn't get that cleaned up as well. Where you have old alluvium, that means water deposited soils, it erodes a second time very easily. As that river does what rivers do, is it meanders back and forth across its floodplain. It will re-erode that alluvium, and this is what we see. Very large portion probably of the soil that ends up in Louisiana off the coast comes from in-stream erosion of our banks. Certainly, those big banks don't always hold of loess, and trees and everything come down with them, especially again, these huge flows that we're now having with climate change. It's very difficult, I think, to guard against that. There's one place south of Sac City, and I haven't yet been able to figure out who this is, but there's one place where they have a construction recycling site apparently, and it's right next to the riverbank. What could possibly go wrong? Why would they do that and put that there? I can't understand how the county allowed that to happen, but it's there right now. Usually, however, instead of lots of erosion, you find banks that are well grassed or well treed along the way. You have lots of mud flats and rock bars and everything for turtles to bask on, and paddlers as well. You can explore these for tracks of herons and sandpipers, killdeer and everything else, raccoons that were there the night before, and deer, and watch for the mussel shells that might indicate what was there, at least, if not what is there. Wildlife is a really great presence along the North Raccoon River, and I would really encourage you to get out and take a look at the wildlife and all the other things along the way. Preparation for paddling, there are a couple things to be aware of. Know your own paddling abilities and be honest about it. I think everybody says, "Oh, I'm an intermediate paddler," and you put them in one of those situations where they have to avoid that sweeper, and you find out they're not an intermediate paddler, and they panic and don't know what to do. So know how far you can go in a day. Are you a paddler or are you a floater? There are lots of people who think, oh, I'm going to paddle this 5 miles or this 10 miles. And really, they're not paddling at all. They're just floating downstream, drinking beer and whatever. And that's fine, except then by about 9 or 10 o'clock that night, when you haven't yet gotten to that access where you left your car, and you disturb that landowner along the way for the umpteenth time and say, geez, I've got to call somebody, or can you take me to my car? You wonder why landowners get mad at paddlers sometimes. So know what your abilities are, how far you can go in a day, how good you are at reading the river. Scout those accesses prior to putting in. Know where you're putting in, taking out. And my wife goes with me on these journeys, and we've gotten to camp in lots of county and state parks all over the state. It's just great fun to see them. And she'll put me in an access in the morning, but before she lets me out, we scout the accesses along the way. And I might say, this one, I can hear the banjos playing. So I don't want you to come to this one until I call you on my cell phone. Okay, so don't sit there and wait. And there have been several times we've been really glad we did that. So scout those accesses so you know where they are and what they look like, and then put in upriver. Wear your life jacket. It does you absolutely no good if it's sitting in front of you and you tip over and you try to grab for it. Put it on, wear it properly. I'm a very strong swimmer. I used to swim competitively. I always wear my life jacket. I want to stay a swimmer, so I don't want to watch. Plus, the bright color will help them find your body a lot better. Bring along water, binoculars, a camera if you can, a map, the paddling brochure, your phone. Although I will warn you that in many rivers across the state, they are down so deep you cannot get a cell phone connection. So keep that in mind. But generally, and have a waterproof bag to put those things in. Watch, look, and listen along the way. I think we spend a lot of time socializing with our federal paddlers, and we miss what we're going by. So watch, look, and listen, and enjoy it. The North Raccoon, I think, is a very surprising river, and I think you'll be pleased if you get out and paddle it. Here are my contact information if you want more information. Take any questions. Yeah. Thank you. There's an old film called The Living. That's the band of
It's not on the North Raccoon.
What's that?
You didn't hear the banjos on the North Raccoon. That's some other river.
That's some other river. So for the most part, on North Raccoons, I didn't, but there are certain places that I just didn't want my wife to have to sit
I can understand. I can
and read all day.
What about the log jams out there around Sac? Did you run into those log jams?
I paddled this section last year at this time, and there were no low jams. In fact, the water levels were wonderful coming out of it. Oftentimes in the spring, you get very high water levels, but after the drought of last, coming into a drought, here, still the water levels were fine.